Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if the Uzumaki clan finds Naruto council bashing harem part 4. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Hokage King 34662 and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Cave in the Iwamoto Cliffs on October 13th, falling. That was the last thing Hinata felt before waking up in the middle of a cave. It's like she could almost feel the weightlessness on her limbs, as she fell closer and closer to the ground. What happened? She mumbled to herself as she tried to sit up. She tried to sit up and get a good look at the cave she was sitting in but couldn't due to a shooting pain she felt in her side and leg. Hello? She weakly called out into the dark cave. All she heard as a reply was her own echo, which made the poor girl frown. Great, she thought to herself as she lied on her back. Where is Naruto? She knew that the boy had saved her, or at least that's what she hoped happened to her. She didn't want to go back to those men that had captured her in the woods. She couldn't go back to them. Naruto! She yelled with a little more force. She knew that one of her legs was broken and that was what was causing her to be pinned down. Hinata knew that she wasn't in the best of shape to begin with, but after that kind of fall, she was just glad she was dead. Well, at least I'm not dead. The 3-year-old mumbled to herself as she waited for her rescuer to return. As Hinata laid on the floor of the cave, she was able to think. She was able to really look back on the last 2 months and go over everything that had happened to her. She came to the conclusion that this world was a dark place. A place that she wanted to make better. A place where a girl her age shouldn't have to be a ninja. Hinata knew that a recently turned 4-year-old and a soon-to-be 4-year-old shouldn't be falling off of cliffs or be in a foreign country without their parents. She knew this from seeing the other little girls and boys from her clan. So why were she and Naruto doing these things? Why were they the ones that had to fight in the Chunin exams? Why were they the ones that had to fight people 3 times their ages? She knew that her mother and father were ninjas. But even they didn't have to do this at their age, right? Hinata didn't want to think about it anymore. She knew that if she started thinking about it more and more that she would start asking questions that she knew she wouldn't want the answers to. So she waited. To her, sitting in the dark cave was semi-relaxing. She didn't have to worry about trying to stealing food from the guards that were watching the past however many days she was with them. She didn't have to worry about finding shelter or getting water. All she had to do was sit and wait. What she didn't know. All she knew was that she wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. Hinata, I'm back. Hinata opened her eyes and saw Naruto standing over her wearing black shirt and brown pants. He had scratches all over his face and neck along with dark circles on and around his eyes. Naruto, what happened? She asked as she looked at her friend with concern. Well, he rubbed the back of his head while smiling nervously. Let's just saw the wildlife around here is a lot different from the ones in the Forest of Death, Naruto said with a smile before walking away and towards what Hinata could only assume was an animal. There was silence for a few minutes because the sound of something sharp clattering onto the floor. Naruto, who was butchering a deer, turned around and sprinted back to Hinata. Hinata-chan, you're awake! He shouted with a giant smile on his face. I'm so glad you're alive. Hinata was startled when he said this. How bad was the fall? She asked herself mentally as she once again tried to sit up and looked at Naruto properly. Of course I'm alive, Naruto-kun, she said with a weak smile. I'm glad you're okay. Naruto looked at his friend and grinned. Don't worry about me, he said with his signature grin and thumbs up. When did you wake up? He asked while moving back towards the deer that he was butchering. Not too long ago, she replied while overegged and trying to sit up and properly look at him. I wouldn't try to move too much, he said from his side of the cave. Your leg looks to be broken. I thought it was just my ankle, she mumbled quietly, but not quite enough for Naruto to not hear it. Wait, your ankle? He asked while moving towards a dead fire pit. When did you hurt your ankle? I don't remember exactly, but it was a couple weeks after we got split up. Oh, he said quietly. Silence was held in the cave while Naruto worked on the fire. It wasn't a big fire since the cave itself wasn't all the big either. It was only around the size of a medium-sized room. Naruto looked over his shoulder when he heard Hinata cough, and frowned. Guppy, I told you needed to get her out of those wet clothes. Mito chided. I'm sorry, but I didn't want her to be naked. Naruto shouted inside of his head. Guppy, she's gonna catch pneumonia if she doesn't get dry. The elderly Uzumaki yelled at the child, who immediately went still and frowned. He looked over at Hinata and noticed that she was lightly shaking. Hinata, are you okay? He asked over his shoulder while rotating the deer meat that was cooking over the fire. I'm a little cold, but that might be because my clothes are still wet. She answered back to the boy, who nodded his head. I'm sorry, he mumbled quietly to himself. And no, it's okay, she said with a small smile on her face. Do you still have all your scrolls? I lost half of them in the fall. Oh, Naruto was kicking himself internally. How could he lose half of his supplies? The only things he had were weapons, bingo book, his information spiral notebook, and his sealing ink. He had lost his food, clothing, and tent in the rocks. Suddenly Naruto looked up and grabbed a kunai and smirked. I have an idea. He walked over to a part of the cave that wasn't being used for anything and started carving into the ground. Hinata heard what her friend was doing and was very confused. What are you doing, Naruto-kun? She asked while trying to turn her head and look at him. I'm gonna make a seal that will dry your clothes faster. He exclaimed over the noise he was making carving up the floor of the cave. Why you can do that? She asked in amazement of her friend's abilities. Yeah. He continued to chip away at the carvings. After another 20 minutes of chipping away at the floor, Naruto was finished the seal. He grabbed some wet leaves that he had found and placed them in the middle of the sealing matrix. He then channeled chakra into the seal and watched all the water evaporate off of the clothing and turn into steam. It works! He shouted as he fist-pumped the air. That's great, Naruto-kun, Hinata said in between coughs. Naruto walked over to Hinata and asked for her clothes so that he could dry them. She nodded her head and had him turn around, and she took off her purple shirt. The pants were a bit more difficult. She had to summon a clone and have it take them off. When Naruto got the clothes, she sent her clone away. This was also the first time she was able to see her broken leg and twisted ankle. Naruto, how long was I asleep? She asked the boy, who shrugged his shoulders. Like 3 to 4 hours? He answered as he dried the clothes. Okay, that makes sense. She said quietly. Yeah, after I rescued you with my new chain claw thingy, I brought you here. He explained to the girl, who nodded her head. What were those things? She asked her friend. Ka-chan and Ba-chan say that they are chakra chains, but they've never seen anything like mine before. Oh really, they sound cool. Yeah, I'm just glad they were able to save you. So am I, she said with a small smile. Are you able to do it again? Naruto looked down at his arms and frowned. He had tried to do it again, but wasn't able to. Akari had said that they could focus on his chains when he got back to Konoha. No, he bowed his head in sadness. Ka-chan said that I could work on using them when we get back home. We're going to go home. Hinata asked her friend, who sighed. I lost my map weeks ago, so I have no clue where we are. He explained to the girl, who frowned. I don't have any supplies, she whispered. I had left most of my stuff in the hotel room. After we got separated, I relied on hunting and finding berries in the woods. Then those men got me. And she couldn't finish her sentence before breaking down in tears. Naruto saw Hinata crying and rushed over to her side. He crouched down and placed her head in his lap and started to comb through her hair to try and calm her down. Sure, it's okay, Hinata, Naruto whispered as he tried to calm her down. It was just a thought, Hinata. It's okay. I'm here now. He whispered to her, and she relaxed into his lap. And I'll always protect you. Hinata tilted her head up and looked to see Naruto with his Sharingan activated. She gasped when she saw that there were 3 tomes in both of his eyes. Naruto, she whispered as she saw the slowly spinning red eyes. It took Naruto about 25 minutes to get Hinata to calm down. Once she was calm, he summoned a clone to get them the roasted deer. After dinner, Naruto and Hinata just laid on the ground together until they fell asleep. Naruto had been asleep when he sensed 5 people outside of the cave he and Hinata were in. He kept his eyes closed but honed in on the people to determine if they were a threat or not. Look boys, we found the kid who killed Yuma. One of the men shouted from outside of the cave. Naruto's eyes widened after he heard this. He immediately woke up Hinata, who groaned and protested being woken up. Hinata-chan, we need to get out of here. Naruto shouted while he made a clone to pack up the scrolls. Where do you think you're going? One of the gargoyles yelled as he went through hand seals for a lightning jutsu. Lightning release, static shock. Naruto's eyes widened as he saw the bolts of lightning rushing towards him. He jumped up and went through 4 hand seals and slamming his hand on the ground. Earth release, rock wall. Naruto turned his back on the rock wall that he had created and tried to pick up Hinata, who by this point was wide awake. Naruto, what are you going to behind you? Hinata shouted to her friend. Naruto turned his head and avoided a kick to the skull. He reached into his ninja pouch and grabbed a kunai. He threw it at the man's skull, which instantly killed him. Hinata, can you walk? He shouted as he started going through hand seals. No, and if I try I probably won't last very long. She yelled and dragged herself to the wall to try and stand up. Lightning style, Bolt Blitz. Naruto stretched out his and sent out a torrent of lightning towards the ninja who had just tried to kick him. The bolts hit him right in the stomach, sending him flying back into the cave. Naruto glanced over at Hinata and saw her trying to stand up. Looks like I'm carrying her back to Konoha. Naruto sprinted over to Hinata and picked her up bridal style and ran out of the cave. He looked outside and noticed that the moon was up high in the sky and groaned. It's night time. Can my luck get any worse? He angrily thought as he started sprinting on the water. Shuriken Kagebushin no Jutsu. Ah, come on! Naruto shouted as he tried to use his whisker to feel where the shuriken were going to hit. Ka-chan, Ba-chan, anyone home? He thought while sprinting on the water trying to escape the 4 remaining gargoyles. You're lucky I'm a light sleeper, guppy. How did you end up in this mess? Mito asked as she tried to figure out where Naruto trying to go. I don't know. They nearly blew up the cave. I grabbed the cave and just started running. Do you know if there's an island close by? He asked as he ran into the inky black ocean. Depending on the direction you're going, you could be close to Yuzu. Yuzu? Never heard of it. It's the island where I was born. I think it's 160 miles away. You'd need to run at least 26 miles a day. You get there in 6 days. Then you'd have to get past the whirlpools, which will be tough. Okay, do I have any more options? Mito thought for a second before answering his question. Well, there's Wave Country, but that's 450 miles away. Naruto immediately stopped running to think about the answer his grandmother just gave him. Wait, why is that so much farther away than Yuzu? He asked out loud to his grandmother. Well, Guppy, Yuzu is about 200 miles wide. You have to run the entire width of Yuzu in order to get past it. Then consider the fact that from Yuzu to Wave is 90 miles. Add that, the width of Yuzu, and the 160 miles to get to Yuzu, and you 450 miles too, and how long would that take me? He grumbled as he started running again. About 11 days if you sprint and run 40 miles a day. Wonderful, he mumbled to himself, and he continued to push forward. By this point Naruto could only barely feel the 4 men behind him. However, he was about to run straight through a rainstorm. He groaned as he tried to pick up the pace and get through so that he wouldn't have to get Hinata any more sick. It can't get any worse, can it? Naruto asked out loud to no one in particular. Unfortunately for Naruto, things did in fact get much worse. After running nearly 40 miles a day for 3 days straight, Hinata's condition started getting much worse. Before, Naruto would occasionally hear Hinata groan or cough while he carried her, but now he could visibly see that she couldn't breathe very well and complained about a sharp pain in her chest. When he got to a small island, he was able to check her over and he confirmed that she had pneumonia. Along with that, her leg looked like it was infected and her ankle was still bruised. He had fashioned splints for both her leg and ankle and had torn his green shirt to make Hinata a cold albeit sweaty compress for her head. Bachan, Kachan, what do I do? The boy asked as he examined Hinata's weak form. Would he be able to get into Yuzu? Akari asked the aged Uzumaki, who shook her head no. Unfortunately, Guppy, you need a seal key made out of Uzumaki blood to get there. His grandmother explained to him, which made the boy frown. You don't have the knowledge to make it. You'll just have to get to Wave before the sickness takes poor Hinata-chan. You only have 290 miles to go. What if I use Ka-chan's chakra? He urgently asked as he picked Hinata up and started running off towards Wave. Naruto-kun, your body isn't developed to use my yoki. I'm sorry, but this will have to be your own strength. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he sprinted towards the island of Wave. My own power, huh? He asked as he ran. I will not let Hinata-chan die, he thought to himself as he ran just a little faster. I will keep my promise to Hitomi Ka-chan and Mikoto Ka-chan. I will not give up. From this point moving forward, Naruto was running 60 miles a day using his chakra. Before, he was just running by using the endurance that he had gotten training before the exams. However, now he was reinforcing his muscles with as much chakra as he could. 3. It took him 6 days to get to the island of Wave. Naruto had been as fast as his body could take him, and it had taken its toll. He had never been so achy and tired in his short life. But he wasn't worried about himself. Right now he was more worried about who he was carrying. Hinata wasn't look good. She was pale, covered in sweat, and had rosy cheeks. She was now violently coughing up mucus that was sometimes mixed with blood. However, there was some good. The splint that Naruto had made had helped keep her leg and ankle from getting any worse. When Naruto arrived on Wave, he immediately noticed the lack of any medical aid. He searched the village of any doctor or healer but couldn't find any. When he asked around, all he heard was that once a month a medical ninja from Konoha always came and took care of their sick. Naruto looked at Hinata, whose symptoms had plateaued for the time being, and decided to head straight for Konoha. Bachan, how long will it take me to get to Konoha from here? He asked as he started to tree hop while carrying Hinata. He did his best to try not to shift her in his arms. If you're going this pace you should be there the night of the 3rd day, she said in astonishment. She had been looking at his energy and chakra bars and they were only 1/8 full. She didn't know how he was able to go this long. Is this the length he'll go for her? She wondered as he continued to hop through the trees. Once Naruto stopped on the first day of tree hopping, he decided to summon a fox and have it tell Sarutobi that he was almost at the gates of Konoha. The fox nodded its head and disappeared to go deliver the message. Once the fox was gone, he looked at Hinata and sighed. Just hold on, we're almost home. He whispered to her, as she slept on a mat he made out of leaves. Naruto woke up the next morning with a determined look on his face. He made a simple breakfast for himself and Hinata and gathered them fresh water to drink. Once that had happened, he placed Hinata gently into his arms and hopped into the first tree. It was there where Hinata's symptoms took a nosedive. She started coughing up blood and moaning in pain while situated in his arms. Ka-chan, I don't think she's going to make it. Naruto shouted as he pushed himself to go even faster. Kid, you gotta get to Konoha fast. She urged her son while she sat nervously on the couch inside of the seal. What will happen if I use up all of my chakra? He shouted as he started pumping chakra to his legs. Best case scenario, you pass out from chakra exhaustion. Worst case scenario, you and I both die. Naruto paused for a second and looked down at the weak form of Hinata. She was so weak and tired that she couldn't even open her eyes and look at him. Hinata, he whispered to her friend who groaned in response. Just hold on for me, okay? We're almost home. And then Naruto? She whispered weakly. Naruto looked at her and smiled softly. Just a little longer, I promise. He then channeled all of his remaining chakra to his legs and sprinted to Konoha. Or at least until he sensed 4 ninjas coming at him. By this point he was only 60 miles away from Konoha. He stopped running and noticed that all of the emotions were gone. I don't like this, Naruto mumbled as he observed the ninjas in front of him. Naruto Uzumaki, under the orders of Danzo Shimura you are to be terminated. We are your judge, jury, and executioner. Naruto's eyes turned into the Sharingan, and his anger skyrocketed. I have been running for the past 10 days from Kirigakure carrying a dying teammate, and you think you can just kill me before I get there? He shouted as he formed the ram hand seal with one hand. Bring down the thunder! Lightning rained down from the sky and hit one of the root agents, scorching him to ash. Naruto looked at the other three and frowned at them. Usually I don't try to kill on the first move, but I have somewhere to be. Naruto took off towards Konoha much to the surprise of the agents that were sent after him. Fire style, fireball jutsu. Naruto did a flip and held up the same seal he just used. Water style, water whip jutsu. The whip hit the ninja square in the neck, causing him to stumble and hit his head on a tree branch, which killed him. Naruto continued to tree hop towards Konoha but was weary of the other two agents that were lurking in the trees. Sometimes he had to dodge kunai that were thrown at him, but other than that he decided not to worry about that. Until a large ball of mud was flung at him. Alright, that's it. He closed his eyes and found the two ninjas. He maneuvered Hinata in his arms and threw a kunai at both the ninja. One of them got hit in the chest and fell down towards ground, causing the kunai to get lodged deeper into his chest, killing him instantly. I won't let you get to Konoha. The root agent yelled as he ran out of the trees and towards Naruto. The agent tossed some shuriken at Naruto, who dodged them. Naruto looked at the man who accidentally looked him in the eyes and casted a paralysis genjutsu on him. Naruto sprinted towards him and slashed him in the throat, killing him. Someone wasn't in a good mood, Akari said after the fight ended. She now understood what Mito had told her. He was ruthless when he didn't want to be messed with. I just want to get Hinata back to Konoha, he said as he channeled all his Reming chakra back to his legs. He looked down at Hinata, who looked even more pale, and frowned. I won't let you die, Hinata! He screamed and he sprinted full speed towards the village. It only took a few more hours before Naruto felt the sheer drain of his chakra. It felt like his heart was beating faster and faster as he ran. His legs were burning, his arms were aching. Guppy, you need to stop pumping chakra or else bad things will happen, Mito yelled from his head. Naruto simply ignored her and continued to run. Do it for her. Do it for Hinata. He pushed the last ounce of chakra he had into his legs, and that was when he saw them. The 30-foot-tall gates of Konohagakure no Sato. He smiled as a few tears streamed down his face when he passed them. Naruto-kun. He looked over and saw Hiruzen Sarutobi standing in his Hokage robes, waving at him with a big smile on his face. Next to him stood his adopted siblings, Yugao and Kakashi, who had tears in their eyes. Next to them were Shursui, who had a massive smile on his face, and Itachi, who was also smiling. Standing next her son was Mikoto, who had the biggest smile on her face. Next to her was a sobbing Hitomi, and her husband Hayashi, who, while not crying like his wife, was quite pleased to see Naruto return with his daughter. Naruto walked over to them, albeit very slowly. Each step he took felt like he was walking in lead. By the time he made it over to the group, he had nothing left, and nearly stumbled. He gritted his teeth as he looked at Hitomi with tears in his eyes. I'm sorry I couldn't keep your promise, he whispered as he bowed his head in shame while still holding a barely alive Hinata. Hitomi looked at the child and smiled at him. She took her daughter from his arms and kissed him on the forehead. She then looked at her daughter, whose eyes had opened just a little to see her mom. Ka-chan? She whispered as she tried to look into her mother's eyes but couldn't due to how weak her body was. Hitomi shushed her daughter gently and rocked her in her arms. She looked at Naruto, who by this point was willing himself to stand in front of her. Thank you, Naruto-kun, she said with a gentle smile on her face. Thank you for bringing her home. She then moved out of the way so that Mikoto could see him. She knew that the boy was on his last legs and she wanted Mikoto the chance to see him. Naruto-kun, the elder Uchiha breathed as she collapsed on her knees to catch the now falling boy before he hit the ground. She shifted him to her lap so that he could be as comfortable as possible. Sochi, she whimpered while trying to keep his attention on her. You did so well, my son, my beautiful baby boy. You did so well. She tried to keep her voice as even as possible to not scare the poor boy who she knew could possibly be dying in her arms. Hinata, he mumbled as he tried to stay awake, but his body simply couldn't let him. It was as though his eyelids were made of lead. I brought her back, he said before coughing up blood. Never gave up. Yes, you were just a brave boy. She praised as tears streamed down her face. You are my brave little boy. My brave Sochi-kun. She smiled as she kissed his forehead. I love you, Ka-chan, he mumbled under his breath. Mikoto could see that he was losing the battle against conciseness. Naruto-kun, I need you to do one more thing for me, okay? She asked while looking at Kakashi and Yugao, who were crying next to her. I need you to close your eyes and rest. But Nada, he mumbled as he struggled to keep his eyes open. Naruto, she's gonna be okay. She smiled at the child, who looked at her confused. That was when the dam broke for the poor mother. She didn't all-out sob, but her Manjikyu Sharingan activated as she watched the child take what could be his last breaths. I'll be okay, she said with a sad smile on her face. I promise I'll be okay. She kissed the boy on his forehead one more time and gave him one last smile before giving his blood-covered hand a light squeeze. Rest, sweetie, she spoke softly into the boy's ear. You can rest now. The Orange Dragon, downtown Konoha on October 23, 52 AFK. Mikoto sighed as she walked down the streets of downtown Konoha. She was wearing black flats, a white button-up shirt, and a green skirt that went down to her ankles. I'm late to my own gathering, she mumbled to herself as she entered the Orange Dragon. It was a relatively new place that had opened up after the end of the Third Great War. It was a one-story building covered in ebony wood paneling with bright orange accents. Along with the exterior of the building was an outdoor waiting area fitted with tables and rocking chairs. Mikoto entered the restaurant, and was greeted by a young woman wearing all black and a bright orange half-apron. She was around 5 feet 6 inches and had short brown hair with brown eyes. Konnichiwa. She bowed. Welcome to the Orange Dragon. Do you have a? She looked up and instantly recognized the woman standing in front of her. Oh, Uchiha-sama, she squeaked, bowed again and started shaking behind her desk. I didn't know you would be here. I hope you weren't waiting for very long, she asked the woman with worry laced in her voice. Mikoto looked at the poor hostess and frowned. Does the Uchiha name really bring fear in our own village? She pondered while giving the woman a kind smile. No. The mother reassured the worker who gave a week in return. I just got here, but I was going with some friends who I think are already here. The worker looked on her desk and smiled. Yes, they are in the back room, Uchiha-sama. Please enjoy your time here. She bowed to Mikoto, who smiled and bowed back. Thank you for having my friends and me here. Mikoto replied as she straightened out her skirt. Would you like me to lead you back to where they are? The hostess moved from behind the small desk and gestured for Mikoto to follow her. Mikoto nodded her head and followed the short lady as they weaved in and out of tables. The hostess stopped in front of an ebony-framed paper door. Your party is in here, Uchiha-sama. She bowed, turned and walked away back to the front of the restaurant. Mikoto slid open the door and walked into the room. She was immediately assaulted by the smell of fresh bread and the slightly salty smell of miso soup with turkey in it. She smiled when she looked up and saw Hitomi and Hayashi sitting at one end of the table. She turned her head and saw that Shikaku and Yoshino were at the other end. It's good to see that Fugaka still lets you out of the house, Miko. Shikaku stood up and greeted the women with a hug. He placed his white napkin on the table and brushed off his black pants. He wore a white dress shirt with the first 2 buttons unbuttoned and a black blazer. It's good to see that Yoshino still gets you out of the house, you lazy oaf. Mikoto smiled and returned the hug. I had to drag his lazy ass out in order to get here one time. Yoshino smirked as she too got up to greet her old friend. She was a lovely woman dressed in a red and white dress with her brown hair flowing down her back. On her feet were a pair of red 4-foot heels. Mikoto smiled at the lovely Nara couple, and then went over to hug Hitomi and Hayashi. It's good to see you in places outside of the Hokage's office. Hitomi squealed while crushing her friend in a hug. For today's lunch, Hitomi went with a dark purple blazer, black blouse, and white pants with black 5-foot heels. Indeed. Hayashi stood up and stretched out his hand to shake Mikoto's. Although I was quite pleased to see you at the council meeting last month, he neutrally replied to the woman who nodded her head. Yes, it was nice to get out the manor. She smiled while pulling out her chair at the table. It's nice that we are all together, and we aren't dealing with bad news from the Hokage. She joked much to the table's amusement. Yes, I'm glad that we aren't in the old man's office to hear bad news. Hitomi laughed while placing her hands in her lap. I'm just glad I'm at a meeting to talk about something other than damage control. Shikaka grumbled while blowing on his bowl of turkey miso soup. Damage control? Yoshino asked with a raised eyebrow. For what? He's probably referring to the meeting we just had about the sanctions the administration is placing on Kiri due to the Chunin exams. Hayashi explained to the group. The news of what happened to the genin that were sent to Kiri swept across the village like a wildfire. People were talking about it in cafe, bars, grocery stores, even in libraries. Most of the civilians were reasonably uneasy about the fact that so many of their village's ninjas had been killed during what they thought were peaceful times. It's such a shame what happened to those poor genin. Yoshino lamented to the group, who all nodded their heads. Mikoto and Hitomi were trying to put on brave faces for the group, however everyone could tell that the news had affected deeply. Yeah, Hitomi whispered while trying not to let a tear fall. At least none of our clans were among the ones affected, right? The Nara matriarch said in an attempt to lighten the mood slightly. This, however, had the exact opposite effect. Mikoto and Hitomi bowed their heads in sadness for their lost children. They had been holding out hope that both of them were alive, but it was getting harder and harder to do after going days with no news. The Hyugas were affected by the violent acts that took place in Kirigakure. Hayashi kept a neutral face, but all those in the room could clearly tell that something had happened, something big. Yoshino looked at the two women and then back at her husband, who was still eating his soup. She poked him in the side, which caused the man to glance up and look at the current state of the room. What a drag, he mumbled while whipping his mouth with his napkin. They'll be okay, he consoled while looking at the two mothers. I keep telling you both this. They are both good ninjas who will get back home. This was not the response that Yoshino was looking for. In fact, it only made things more confusing for her. Wait, what do you mean they? Everyone excluding the Nara matriarch froze. Sarutobi never actually told them that Naruto and Hinata's involvement in the Chunin exams was an S-rank secret. They all just agreed that the fewer the people that knew about the fact that Naruto and Hinata were ninjas the better. Alright, what's going on? Yoshino placed her hands on the table and arched an eyebrow. She didn't receive a response, which made her ever so slightly more frustrated. Okay, since no one wants to say anything, I'll just piece it together myself. She then proceeded to get in front for the door and smirk. Okay. So what do we know? We know that Genin died in Kirigakure. We also know that Shikaka keeps telling Mikoto and Hitomi something along the lines of, they'll be okay. This could mean a few things, but let's wait before we come to a conclusion. Yoshino looked at her husband, who was grumbling under his breath with his hands over his head. Hayashi was glaring at Shikaka while Hitomi and Mikoto were stone-faced. Yoshino continued to talk while wailing around the room. So we need to think of genin who are connected to Hitomi and Mikoto. Both are matriarchs of their clans, however there weren't any official casualties from either the Hyuga clan nor the Uchiha clan, so that rules out anyone from the clan themselves. She paused to take a sip of her water before continuing. So if they aren't from the clan, then it has to be something directly related to them, right? She smirked to the group, who was getting more and more nervous. Now this is the hard part. What could possibly be directly related to Mikoto and Hitomi that would make them sad about genin? We first need to ask, what is a genin? They are usually children. Both Mikoto and Hitomi have children. Mikoto has an older son and a young son, while Hitomi has a daughter. She moved her hand to her chin to look more dramatic. To anyone else that would make sense, but to use it does, because we know that Itachi is already a Chunin and Sasuke is a 5-year-old. Hinata hasn't had her birthday yet, so she's still 4. Those are all the children, right? Wrong. We need to remember that if Naruto was alive, he would be 5 too. Speaking of Naruto, we need to first figure out if he's alive. We can figure this out through deductive reasoning. Sarutobi announced that a boy was used to seal the 9 tails on October 26, 47 AFK. To any normal person this would mean nothing to them, but to us in this room, it means a whole lot. We all know that an Uzumaki is the only one who can possibly hold all of the Fox's yoki. There was only one Uzumaki in the village, our dear friend Kushina Uzumaki Senju, who was due to give birth on October 10, 47 AFK. When was the Kyuubi attack? October 10, 47 AFK. So we now know that Naruto is in fact alive, but what does that have to do with the Chunin exams? In order for this theory to make sense, Naruto would have to be in the Chunin exams. Why wouldn't, at the time, 4-year-old be in the Chunin exams? Well, that's where the theory falls apart. Yoshino shrugs her shoulders and walks back to their seat at the table. The only way for both of you to be sad was if both Hinata and Naruto were in the Chunin exams. The only problem with that is I can't think of any reason for them to be there. You were right, Shikaka mumbled with his head down. He looked up to see shock written all over his wife's face. Naruto and Hinata were both put in the Chunin exams. I'm more surprised that you knew that Naruto was alive this entire time. Hayashi took a sip of his water, then turned to look at his wife, who was seething in anger. How did you know he was alive? Hitomi bellowed. Hayashi put a hand on his wife's lap in an attempt to calm her down. I received a message from an ANB that their son was killed after the sealing. Mikoto gritted her teeth and clenched her right fist in her lap. I was told that after Minato sealed the 9 tails that Naruto died taking the fox with him. I was also told that same thing. Hitomi added while bending a metal fork in her hand to try and relieve her anger. Shikaku and Hayashi looked at each other and sighed. They both knew why their wives were deceived. They were a part of the group of people that knew that Naruto actually lived. Let's just start from the beginning. Shikaku stood up and grabbed his glass of water. The meeting on October 11th was one of the longest and hardest meeting we had ever had to be a part of. All of the previous clan heads were there, the current clan heads were there, the civilians were there, hell, even the fire daimyo was there, he explained before taking a sip of his water. When Sarutobi sat in the Hokage's chair instead of the elder chair, that's when we knew the gravity of the situation. Minato had just died, a new Kage had to be figured out. Along with the thousands of casualties, hundreds of wounded, and the tens of orphans, there was a lot going on. Sarutobi brought out a small blonde baby and said that Minato had used an orphan named Naruto to seal the 9 tails. But everyone that knew a thing or two knew that he was lying. He passed to let Hayashi add anything, but the clan had stayed silent, so he continued. I and Shibi knew almost instantly that that baby was Minato's son. He had blonde fucking hair for Kami's sake. What other blonde babies were born on that night that would be named Naruto? So why did you say anything to us, Shikaku? Hitomi screamed. She had raccoon-like marks all over her face from the tears that were pouring from her eyes. Why didn't you do anything? Everyone that knew Minato and Kushina tried to adopt the child. Hayashi said somberly. I tried, Shikaku tried, Inochi tried, Shibi tried, Tsum tried, but not only did our parents say no, but so did Sarutobi. Yes, he said, why would you all try to adopt a random blonde baby? It would look quite strange, wouldn't it? He deliberately didn't say the boy's last name to throw all of us off. Even when he did say that he was Naruto Uzumaki on the day he announced his status as the Jinchuriki, he explained him giving the name Uzumaki as a tribute to the fallen clan. This was also meant to throw people like Mikoto and Hitomi off. He didn't want to reveal who Naruto truly was. That's why he sent Hitomi and INBU that said he died after the sealing. That's why you both didn't say anything. Sarutobi tried to hide him in plain sight. Mikoto reasoned with clarity written on her face. Yeah, and look how well that turned out. Hitomi slammed her hands on the table, causing the dishes to rattle. You out of everyone should know the hell that child went through. The only reason I know is because he has horrible night terrors. The only way I can calm him down is if I get Hinata and place her next to him. Actually, he is a very restless sleeper even when I'm there. He does scream or anything, but he does move around a lot. She explained their sleeping arrangements to the group, who all nodded their heads. But let's not get off track. Shikaku, what happened in that meeting? Well, it was decided that Sarutobi would become Kage again. The funeral arrangements were made, damage reports, and what would happen to the child. Sarutobi was the one who sent the ANBU. That seems like something he would do. Yashino stood up and went over to crying Hyuga. You couldn't have known any of this because everyone in that room was sworn to secrecy. She comforted while rubbing the women's back. I lost so much time, she sobbed into the Nara's shoulder. And now they are possibly dead. Suddenly there was a knock on the sliding door which surprised everyone in the room. Since Shikaku was standing up, he walked over to the door and cracked it open. I'm sorry to bother you, Nara-sama, but there's a talking fox outside looking to talk to Uchiha-sama. Mikoto, who was listening to the hostess talk, widened her eyes. She shot out of her seat and ran to the door. She pushed Shikaku out of the way and looked at the woman with hopeful eyes. Bring them here and bring us a platter of assorted cooked meats as well. She smiled at the woman who nodded then left. Are you going to explain why you knocked Shikaku over to talk to a fox? Yoshino went over to check on her husband who had swirls in his eyes. Well, did she say a fox? Hitomi asked with just as much hope in her eyes. Mikoto nodded her head and smiled. He's alive. Who's alive? Yoshino yelled in confusion. She is talking about Naruto-kun, a white fox said from the doorway. She walked inside of the room and hopped onto the table. She was around the same size of a house cat, and had a long bushy tail. I don't think I've ever met you before. Mikoto brought her hand up to the fox for her to sniff. That's because we've never actually met before, Uchiha-sama, the fox said in a high-pitched but smooth voice. My name is Vale and I am the head of the Medical Fox Division and specialize in healing. I am here to tell you some information about your kits. Well then, by all means. Mikoto gestured to the table, signaling to the fox that the floor was hers. She smiled and sat down in her seat, eager to get anything new about Naruto or Hinata. Before you begin, please tell me how you know Naruto. Shikaku raised an eyebrow at the fox, who glared at him. Naruto-kun is the Kitsune's summoner, and by extension my summoner. If you have a problem with that, I can bring you to my manager, though I don't think you want to deal with her, seeing how the last time you both met half your village was destroyed. Vale smirked at the Nara, who paled at the thought of being brought to speak with the Kyuubi. No, that won't be necessary. Please continue with what you were about to say. Vale nodded her head and took a moment to collect herself. Last night, one of my medical foxes was summoned by Naruto-kun to send a message to Hiruzen Sarutobi that he was almost at the gates of Konoha. If that was last night, why are you telling us this now? Hayashi asked the fox, who sighed. Because since it was the wrong department, it had to get told to me, who had to report it to the communications department. Then I had to deal with the fact that Hinata and Naruto are both severely injured. So I sent a team to diagnose what was wrong with them. She paused so that she could let the adults take in all this information. Naruto is currently suffering from chakra depletion and exhaustion, however he is pushing through it to get Hinata back to Konoha. From what my team told me, he should be dead by now. His leg muscles are worn out, his joints need serious rest, his stomach is shutting down, his blood sugar is low, and the muscle fibers in his legs were tearing at an alarming rate. I would say that the only thing keeping him alive right now is adrenaline pumping through his body, and sheer willpower to save Hinata. Vale explained to the table. All the mothers had shocked expressions on their face. Mikoto was clenching her fist so hard that blood was leaking from her palm. All of the men had neutral expressions on their face. What about Hinata? Hitomi asked in a meek voice, scared about the condition that her daughter was in. Vale closed her eyes and used her left paw to rub her eyes. If Naruto was at death's door, then Hinata has one foot in it. Hinata looks to be suffering from a broken and infected leg, a broken ankle, and is suffering from severe pneumonia, which means fever, chest pains, chills, coughing, and labored breathing. She looks ghostly with rosy cheeks, and is coughing up phlegm mixed with blood. I cannot in good faith say that she will live past tomorrow. The room was silent for a very long time after the fox spoke. Somewhere in the middle, Vale's retelling did a waiter place the meats on the table and leave. Now that Vale was finished speaking, she lunged at a piece of perfectly cooked medium-rare steak. Why didn't you do anything? Hitomi screamed at the fox, who lowered her ears in shame. Ma'am, my medical foxes are not, nor will they ever be equipped to injuries like Naruto's. The only way we could treat them was if we took both of them to our realm, which we could without going through a lot more hurdles and hops, not to mention the bypassing of centuries of rituals. Also the fact that we couldn't have done anything to Hinata without a written letter of consent from the Shika summons. Hell, Naruto hasn't even gotten the right to go to our realm. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to trust Naruto to get her back here so that she can be treated by a human doctor. I'm very sorry and I wish I could help more, but my paws are tied. I understand. Thank you for doing all that you could for my daughter. Hitomi bowed her head in shame. She knew that the fox was doing all that she could to save her daughter, and she shouldn't have snapped like that. Wait, you originally said that a message was meant for Hokage-sama, right? Yoshino asked the fox, who nodded her head. Did it ever get to him? Yes. Willow, who is the head of the internal communications and espionage, should have gotten to him the same time I got here. Why wasn't he notified last night? Shikako asked while reaching over to grab a piece of meat from the table. Mikoto-sama made a rule that if he was talking to a man with bandages on his head not to make our presence known. He was talking to him last night, so Willow waited to now to tell him. Just out of curiosity, what were they talking about? Mikoto asked the fox, who shrugged. All Willow said was that they were talking about something crossing some barrier. She replied while taking another piece of steak. That must have been Naruto when entered the barrier around Konoha. Wait, if Naruto told the fox that he was close last night? Mikoto's eyes winded when she realized just how close she was to Naruto. Out of nowhere, smoke started billowing into the room. Out of the smoke walked Kakashi and Yugao, who had worried expressions on their face. Their sudden appearance caused everyone to jump and grab their weapons. Once they realized who it was, they put everything away. We need Mikoto, Hitomi, and Hayashi at the gates. Naruto has been spotted 30 minutes away from the village, he announced while sneaking a piece of meat for later. Mikoto made a clone and had her go to the compound to get Itachi and Shursui. She then pulled a handful of 100 ryu bills and gave them to Shikaku, who nodded his head. Yoshino also got up and grabbed her bag. I'm gonna get to the hospital and let them know you're coming. She kissed her husband and left the room in a shunshin. Alright, I'm gonna head back to report that Naruto and Hinata have arrived. Thank you for the meal. They'll yipped before disappearing. Mikoto, Yugao, Kakashi, Hitomi, and Hayashi ran out of the room and left the restaurant. They were glad that Shikako was able to explain to the poor hostess what was going on. Once they reached the main road, they all started running to the gates. When they were halfway to the gates, Mikoto's clone found them with Itachi and Shursui behind her. What's going on? Shursui asked as they sprinted and jumped from rooftop to rooftop in the Shinobi district. Naruto and Hinata were spotted outside of the village. Kakashi answered quickly as he jumped to the next roof. The group continued running from rooftop to rooftop until they reached the gates and saw Sarutobi in his full Hokage regalia. I'm glad all of you were able to make it here. The aged Kage smiled at the group, who all nodded their heads. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Mikoto smiled back and looked at the entrance to the village. How long until he's here? She looked back at the elderly man. He should be here any minute. He smiled as he heard something coming towards them. Out of the trees came Naruto, cradling Hinata in his arms. The first thing that any of them noticed was just how exhausted he looked. He had bags under his eyes and was hunched over. He had dirt, cuts, and scrapes everywhere. Even his clothing was on its last legs. Naruto-kun! He looked over and saw Hiruzen Sarutobi standing in his Hokage robes, waving at him with a big smile on his face. Next to him stood his adopted siblings, Yugao and Kakashi, who had tears in their eyes. Next to them were Shursui, who had a massive smile on his face, and Itachi, who was also smiling. Standing next her son was Mikoto, who had the biggest smile on her face. Next to her was a sobbing Hitomi, and her husband Hayashi, who while not crying like his wife was quite pleased to see Naruto return with his daughter. Naruto walked over to them, albeit very slowly. Each step he took felt like he was walking in lead. By the time he made it over to the group, he had nothing left, and nearly stumbled. He gritted his teeth as he looked at Hitomi with tears in his eyes. I'm sorry I couldn't keep your promise, he whispered as he bowed his head in shame while still holding a barely alive Hinata. Hitomi looked at the child standing in front of her, and gently smiled at him. She knew he had spent everything he had to get her back here. She knew that the boy in front of her did everything in his power to keep Hinata safe, and right now that was the only thing that mattered. She took a shaky step towards the boy and kissed him on the forehead. She then gently took her daughter from his arms and kissed her on the forehead, causing her to wake up. Ka-chan? She whispered as she tried to look into her mother's eyes but couldn't due to how weak her body was. Hitomi shushed her daughter gently and rocked her in her arms. She looked at Naruto, who by this point was willing himself to stand in front of her. Thank you, Naruto-kun, she said with a gentle smile on her face. Thank you for bringing her home. She then moved out of the way so that Mikoto could see him. She knew that the boy was on his last legs and she wanted Mikoto the chance to see him. Naruto-kun, the elder Uchiha breathed as she collapsed on her knees to catch the now falling boy before he hit the ground. She shifted him to her lap so that he could be as comfortable as possible. Sochi, she whimpered while trying to keep his attention on her. You did so well, my son, my beautiful baby boy. You did so well. She tried to keep her voice as even as possible to not scare the poor boy who she knew could possibly be dying in her arms. Hinata, he mumbled as he tried to stay awake, but his body simply couldn't let him. It was as though his eyelids were made of lead. I brought her back, he said before coughing up blood. Never gave up. Yes, you were just a brave boy. She praised as tears streamed down her face. You are my brave little boy. My brave Sochi-kun. She smiled as she kissed his forehead. I love you, Ka-chan, he mumbled under his breath. Mikoto could see that he was losing the battle against conciseness. Naruto and I need you to do one more thing for me, okay? She asked while looking at Kakashi and Yugao who were crying next to her. I need you to close your eyes and rest. But Nada, he mumbled as he struggled to keep his eyes open. Naruto, she's gonna be okay. She smiled at the child who looked at her confused. That was when the dam broke for the poor mother. She didn't all-out sob, but her Manjikyu Sharingan activated as she watched the child take what could be his last breaths. I'll be okay, she said with a sad smile on her face. I promise I'll be okay. She kissed the boy on his forehead one more time and gave him one last smile before giving his blood-covered hand a light squeeze. Rest, sweetie, she spoke softly into the boy's ear. You can rest now. Once Mikoto was sure that Naruto was unconscious and securely in her arms, she slowly lifted him and walked next to Hitomi. Both mothers looked at each other with tears in their eyes and sprinted towards the hospital. They're really back, Mikoto whispered to the mother next to her as they ran. Let's just hope they live to see the fruits of their labor. She replied with a smile full of worry. When they finally reached the hospital, there was already a team of nurses outside waiting to take the children from the mother's arms. Among the team of nurses was Yashino, who was waving at them. Man, they look awful. She walked over and placed a hand on both of their shoulders. You both did good work, she whispered before letting the nurses take them inside to the ICU. Once the children were gone, she walked over to Hitomi and Mikoto who were rooted in their places. Hey, the Nara grasped the women's hands in her own and led them towards the door. Shikaku-kun had them box up our food and he brought it with him when he got here. You should eat something. Both mothers let themselves be led towards the ICU waiting room where they saw Shikaku pacing back and forth. He looked up and saw his wife walk in with the two mothers. He immediately walked over and hugged them both. I just saw them and for what it's worth, don't. Mikoto glared at the Nara who hung his head. This wasn't your fault. You did the same thing after Minato and Kushina's funeral. We couldn't do anything about the situation. But I do know that there will be a different outcome than theirs. Shikaku nodded his head and sighed. Kami, this is so fucking troublesome. You can say that again. Mikoto and Hitomi but tuned their heads and glared at the Hokage as he walked into the waiting room. And what are you doing here? Mikoto sneered as she stood up and walked towards her leader who sighed. I know that you're not too pleased with me right now, and to be honest, I'm not too pleased with myself either. I'm just here to send my condolences to you, Mikoto, and to the Hyuga family. He hung his head in shame and bowed to the two women, as the Hokage, as Naruto's mentor, and as the person who authorized for them to go to Kiri. I'm sorry. So sorry. There are multiple things in my life that I regret, this is one of them. Mikoto and Hitomi just looked at him. They didn't have any expression on their face. But everyone there could tell that they were upset. Kakashi and Yugao, who had made their way next to the two mothers, were glaring at their Kage. Is that all you came here to do, Hokage-sama? Shikaka asked from a chair. He tried to signal to the Hokage that they all really just wanted to be left alone. No, he reached into his robes and placed two Chunin vets onto it. He then looked up to see the shocked expressions of everyone there. I'm Herbie giving Genin Naruto Uzumaki and Genin Hinata Hyuga a field promotion to Chunin effective now. Anyone that can survive in a foreign country for nearly 90 days deserves to be a Chunin. In addition to that, they have also been given these. He placed two small pieces of paper which Kakashi and Yugao instantly recognized. There's no way, Yugao whispered as she looked at the paper more closely. So that's why our squad has been down 2 members for so long. Kakashi realized as he looked at the Kage, who nodded his head. Yes. He answered with a small smirk on his face. Can someone explain to me what's going on? Hitomi asked impatiently. Kakashi held up the small pieces of paper and held them up to the two mothers. These are ANBU forms. There are 3 ways you can join the ANBU. You can be handpicked by the Hokage himself like Yugao and I. You can apply, or, and this is the hardest way, the much harder way is that you can be personally requested and recruited by the ANBU commander. You want them to be ANBU? Mikoto asked with wide eyes. Yes. In fact, the current ANBU commander wants them so badly that she agreed to give them a year off to train and hone their skills. If they make it in, they would be placed on a team with Kakashi and Yugao. He smiled at the 2 wide-eyed agents. What will they do for the next year? Kakashi asked, still in shock at the fact that his adopted brother was hand-selected to be in his team. Train, make friends, and continue to learn under me. That is if you let them. Hiruzen answered while looking back at Mikoto and the Hyugas. Well, I let Itachi and Shursui apply for it, so I would look bad if I didn't let Naruto do it. And I have a year to continue to train him along with Shursui and Itachi. I'll let him do it. Mikoto sighed as she looked at the 2 young Uchiha who had varying levels of excitement. Shursui was bouncing off of the walls with excitement, while Itachi was just smiling. I'll have to ask Hinata. I honestly don't know. Hitomi responded quietly. That's fine. All I ask is that you make sure this is what she wants. Sarutobi then turned around and walked out of the waiting room and back to his office, leaving the group alone. Yoshino looked over at Shikaku who was smirking. You knew this would happen, didn't you? Yes, I did. I thought about it after my conversation with Inochi and Hiruzen. There's no way Sarutobi would have a 4-year-old and a 5-year-old be public shinobi. It would cause civil outcry from the civilians, and leave a bad taste in the mouths of most of the shinobi. But ANBU? Then no one would know who they were. They could get famous and no one would have any clue as to who they are. Couple them with Kakashi and Yugao, who are starting to gain traction in the bingo books. You have a team of potential war deterrents all under the age of 20. Hayashi rubbed his chin in deep thought. Politically, it's a great move. One that I didn't even think of. Speaking of political moves, what happens to Naruto's inheritance? Mikoto asked, making everyone's eyes immediately widen. Does that make a 5-year-old the richest person in probably the entire world? No, he would need to be announced in front of the entire council, and take his position as clan head. That would be the easiest way for him to get access of his parents' fortune. Unless he figures out who his parents are and demands it from Sarutobi. Even then, Sarutobi has basically erased all traces of Minato and Kushina together. The only way he figured it out was if someone told him, or he stumbled upon their house. Even I don't know where Minato put it. Shikaku explained as he rubbed his head. He was getting a headache just thinking about that council meeting. How much money could he even have? Yoshino asked in a joking manner. Around 8 to 10 trillion ryu. Shikaku mumbled, which made everyone go silent. That's more money than Konoha's GDP. Hell, that's more than Fire Country's GDP. What is he going to possibly do with that much money? Yugao shouted. He honestly doesn't need to work a day in his life. He's set for the next 6 generations. Kakashi commented from next to Yugao. Well, whatever he decides to do with that money, he's going to be a very, very powerful person with it. Shikaku placed his hands in his pockets as he sat down in a chair. The group all sat down and waited for the doctors to give them any news. They tried to pass the time talking about random topics of telling stories from years gone by, but nothing was working. All the food that was from the Orange Dragon was long eaten. Shikaku had made a clone to get some ramen from the local ramen bar. It was around 10 at night when they got any news from the doctors. Kakashi and Hayashi had decided to go get the women clothing so that they could shower. Mikoto, Hitomi, and Yugao were all doing crossword puzzles while Shikaku was taking a nap. Yoshino was currently out putting her son, Shikamaru, to bed. Are you all here for Naruto, Uzumaki, and Hinata Hyuga? She asked while looking at the large group that was spread out in front of her. Mikoto was the first one to realize that a doctor was speaking and looked up. Her eyes instantly widened and she dashed over to her. Yes, we are. What's the new? How are they? She immediately asked the doctor, who urged her to calm down. Well, she looked at her clipboard and sighed. It's not good. Konoha General Hospital, ICU ward waiting room, October 23, 52 AFK. Hitomi had been doing a puzzle when she heard someone come into the waiting room. She looked up and saw a woman with brown eyes, burnt orange hair tied in a ponytail, and shockingly large breasts. She wore dark blue scrubs, and had a stethoscope around her neck. Yes, we are. What's the new? How are they? Mikoto replied while on the verge of a breakdown. Hitomi saw the Uchiha talking to the doctor, and decided to make her way over as well. Well, she looked at her clipboard, then back at the mothers in front of her. It's not good. She waited till she had all eyes on her before continuing. Hinata is currently asleep and should be awake tomorrow afternoon. She moved her clipboard to the side and continued speaking. We were able to clear most of the mucus that was in Hinata's lungs. We have her on hooked up to both a ventilator and a breathing monitor. We also have her on N4, and we gave her some antibiotics. She should be in the hospital for around a week with proper rest. What about Naruto? Itachi asked from his seat next to Shursui. The doctor rubbed her eyes with her hand and sighed. When he was brought to us, he had a SPC of around 60%. In any normal person they would have died when his SPC reached 85%. The fact that he fought through it to save that girl is a miracle and a testament to his willpower, and just how much he cares about that girl, let alone all the other problems with his joints, legs, muscles, blood sugar, and stomach. The fact that he was alive when he got here was a miracle given to us by Kami herself. By the point everyone in the room was paying attention to the doctor. Even Kakashi and Hayashi, who had just gotten back from their respective house with clothing, were waiting in the entryway listening to her speak. Is He alive? Yugao stuttered through quivering lips. She hadn't been able to talk other adopted younger brother in so long, and she just wanted him to be okay. It was touch and go for a while. She explained to the group who was hanging on to her every word. He flatlined 4 times during the surgery. We had to use advanced medical chakra techniques to try and speed the process. She explained. After a very rough surgery, we were able to heal the damage he did to his legs, joints, and stomach. His blood sugar has also stabilized thanks to some carbohydrates. What about his chakra exhaustion? Mikoto asked with a raised eyebrow. That's where the problems come in. He used up all the chakra in his reserves. This led to his body using up the chakra that was naturally flowing through his body. Remember, there is a difference between the chakra that's in a body's reserves and that's naturally flowing through the body. She told the group, who all looked at her with confusion written on their faces. The orange-haired doctor sighed before diving back into her expiation. In the body, there are 2 main sources of chakra. There's the chakra that's being stored and produced in the chakra reserves that are located on both sides of the stomach. She took a breath before continuing. The chakra here is used for jutsu and to augment the body's physical attributes. Then there is that chakra that other internal organs filter and circulate through the body to keep it running. We call it nuke or non-use chakra. This is the chakra that SPC measures. This chakra is not meant to be used and will store itself in 8 specific points throughout the body. Naruto used up all the chakra in all of his reserves, and a large chunk of nuke that was in his body. Okay, Yugao looked at the others who looked all considerably less confused. So I understand the issue that he didn't have enough chakra, but why couldn't you just give me more chakra? Well, that's where we ran into issues. She rubbed her tired eyes with her hand and frowned. When we went to do a chakra transfusion, his body simply would attack and reject the chakra that we were trying to give him. Why was that happening? Shikako asked the doctor as he stood up from his nap. Did you properly identify Naruto chakra type? We looked on his file and tried to figure it out with his parents, but it seems that Naruto's parents aren't on his file. It only said his blood type, which was B. His father had the blood type, B, and chakra type, AB. His mother also had a blood type of B and a chakra type of A. Mikoto casually said to the doctor who wrote it down. The doctor bowed to her and smiled. Thank you for that information. Wait, chakra type? Yugao asked with a raised eyebrow. Yes, Tsunade-senpai discovered that like blood, chakra also had different antigens and antibodies. Also similar to blood, specific chakra is and isn't compatible with each other. When we tried to give Naruto AB chakra, his body rejected it. It rejected it very violently. So then wait, what chakra type is Naruto? Yugao asked, still very confused by the situation. Well, that's the issue. We tried to put some of his blood into the chakra type machine. It came out as an error and broke the machine itself. She explained to the group, who was now even more confused. How did you know the machine was broken afterwards? Shikako asked while stroking his chin in deep thought. We ran a test batch through it, and it came back with an error. She rubbed the bridge of her nose in frustration. I think I know what happened. Shikako sighed and took out a cigarette and lit it. Naruto's chakra is special because of his baggage. Since his baggage and himself share a body, some of that chakra is mixing with his chakra, creating a new chakra type special to him, and him only. Yes, we came to that conclusion after watching wisps of a deep red substance dance around his internal organs. She said with a light smile. Is that going to be a problem moving forward? Kakashi moved his hand so that it was a visible fist. He knew that some of the doctors didn't like Naruto due to what he contained, and he wanted to make sure that she wasn't one of them. Goodness no. I would never harm a child because of something that should be considered a misfortune. He is a sweetheart who kept trying to reach over and grab Hinata's hand. It was such a strange phenomena, she said with a smile on her face. Those two have quite the bond, it seems. Yes, Hitomi smiled as she whipped tears from her eyes. Hearing that both of the children brought such joy to her, so both of them will be okay. Yugao asked to make sure she understood everything. Like I said earlier, Hinata should be away by tomorrow afternoon. However, Naruto's case is special. We don't know. Attention! A code blue has been reported in ICU room 34. The doctor raised an eyebrow when she looked around and saw the flashing blue lights. She then glanced down at her clipboard, which made her eyes widen. The doctor then sprinted out of the room towards Naruto's room. When Mikoto saw the doctor's eyes widen, she knew that it was Naruto's room. So when the doctor sprinted out of the room, so did she. She followed the women down the many hallways and corridors of the hospital. When the doctor and Mikoto arrived to Naruto's room, there was a single nurse trying to hold Naruto down. She saw that Naruto was somehow awake, thrashing around his bed, and screaming. Nurse Joy, what seems to be the problem? The female doctor moved next to one of the nurses who was at Naruto's bedside. She was a fair-skinned woman with bright pink hair and blue eyes. She was in the usual outfit, light blue scrubs that all Konoha nurses wore. Well, Inoue-sensei, we were monitoring Uzumaki-kun when he suddenly started thrashing around and screaming. We don't understand how he could possibly even be awake. We thought he would be in a coma for at least 2 weeks. The nurse replied as she tried to hold down the thrashing child. Hinata! He shouted while trying to get free from the poor nurse who was trying to hold him down. We need to get him back asleep, or else he'll not only reopen all of his sticks, but he could cause internal bleeding. Dr. Inoue shouted before turning to try and find something in a drawer next to the bed. Have we given him any kind of sedative? She asked the pink-haired nurse who shook her head. You don't remember? Nurse Joy commented while still trying to calm him down. We tried to give him one during his surgery and it didn't work due to his immune system being supercharged by the... Have you tried genjutsu? Both looked up to see Mikoto standing at the foot of Naruto's bed. Dr. Inoue had totally forgotten about the mother who had followed her to the boy's room. The nurse shook her head and frowned. None of the medical nin are here past 2,000 hours. She explained to the mother who frowned. We simply don't have enough of them for the night shift. The fact that we were able to get some for their surgeries was a miracle from Kami-sama herself. Mikoto was shocked to hear how heavily understaffed the hospital was. She had known that they had been heavily taxed due to the constant fighting in the ninja world, but to hear that they didn't even have enough medics for a night shift was unheard of. Wait, you don't have medical nin here at this hour? I just told you we didn't. So we can't put him under any genjutsu. Nurse Joy snapped at the women who brushed it off. Mikoto activated her Sharingan and walked over to the still screaming child. I need you to keep his eyes open. She told the doctor and nurse duo who nodded back to her. If I'm gonna put him under, I need to use a lot of chakra. She thought to herself as she approached the child. Sleep. It only took a few seconds for Naruto to fall back into an unconscious state. Mikoto was grateful that she had been good at illusions back when she was a ninja. She looked at the nurse and doctor who were looking at her with wide eyes. Wow, Nurse Joy whispered to herself. That was so cool. Mikoto chuckled to herself as a sweat drop formed over the back of her head. I mean, it was no big deal. She rubbed the back of her head while she watched Naruto sleep. Shouldn't you do something so that he won't wake up again? Oh, Dr. Inoue shook the amazement from her head and returned to a more professional decorum. We need to call Aizawa-san from anesthesiology so that we can make sure he stays out. How long is he going to be here? Mikoto stroked Naruto's hand with her thumb gently. This was the second time she had seen him in the hospital, and she absolutely hated it. He should be here for at least a month, Dr. Inoue said while checking all of Naruto's vitals. He should be able to be awake in a couple of weeks. You don't sound too sure of yourself. Mikoto glanced at the orange-haired doctor who was frowning. Unfortunately, Uzumaki-kun is a special case. Usually we are able to heal chakra exhaustion by giving them a chakra transfer like I said earlier, but his body wasn't able to receive any kind of chakra. It also doesn't help that he has abnormally large chakra reserves for a 5-year-old. Yeah, I guess you're right. Mikoto sighed to herself before taking one last look at the sleeping child. I'm afraid we must leave. Dr. Inoue stood up and walked towards the door. Visiting hours ended long ago, and he needs his rest. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to escort you back to the waiting room. Mikoto nodded her head and let herself be led back to the waiting room. She saw everyone who had originally come with her to the hospital. Itachi was currently asleep on Shursei's shoulder. Yuga was still doing her puzzle, but anyone who could look into her eyes could tell that she wasn't actually focused on the puzzle. Kakashi and Hitomi were talking about random things, and Shikaku, Yoshino, and Hayashi were playing cards. How was he? Shikaku asked without looking up from the game he was currently playing. Well, she sat down, rubbed her now twitching eyelids. He's gonna be unconscious for at least the next 2 weeks. He was screaming Hinata, so he probably has some kind of mental and emotional trauma, and regular painkillers don't work on him because of the fox. She groaned loudly while throwing herself against a bench that was in the waiting room. Wait, he can't take painkillers? Yugao asked while running her hand through her now greasy purple hair. The fox purges them all from his body. It was the same way with Kushina, replied Yoshino without looking at the ANBU. Alright, Shikaku stood up and stretched his arm to try and crack his back. We need to leave before security forces us to. You think that I'm gonna leave? Hitomi screamed into the dark waiting room. I've been waiting for my babies to come home for the past 3 months, and you think I'm just going to leave them just because they are in the hospital? Hitomi, Mikoto tried to comfort the mother but was cut off. No! I've waited too damn long to see them. I'm gonna be here the minute they both wake up. I'm sorry ma'am, but Uchiha-sama is correct, you must leave. Hitomi looked up to see a large man with pale skin wearing a green and white turtle mask. He had on a gray breastplate that looked like he had been through multiple hard-fought battles due to how many scratches and dents it had. Under the breastplate was a black, mesh, sleeveless turtleneck shirt that came up to just below his chin. He had metal braces on both of his arms. He had one ninja pouch on his hip, and wore black shinobi pants tied into black shin-length boots. Turtle-san, Kakashi nodded to the ANBU who nodded back. I'm afraid it's time for you all to go. Visiting hours resume at 10 a.m. tomorrow. He stood firm in the middle of the waiting room, commanding everyone to look at him. Hayashi sighed and placed his hand on his wife's shoulder. He looked at the ANBU and nodded. We understand ANBU-san. We won't be here any longer. Hayashi, we can all meet back here at 10 a.m. so that we can see Hinata. Yoshino suggested to their stressed mother who relented and nodded her head. Yes, we can meet back here at 10 a.m. Mikoto nodded her head while shaking a sleepy Itachi and Shursei. Both had fallen asleep on the soft bench that lined the waiting room's walls. Alright, fine. We'll meet back here at 10 a.m. Hitomi grumbled bitterly as she was led out of the waiting room by her husband. Yes, we will see you all at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Kakashi informed the group as he stood next to Yugao who had just put away her puzzle. She looked up at the group and smiled. As everyone left the hospital, Mikoto stopped walking and looked at the hallway to lead to Naruto's room. She was fighting everything in her to not go back to that room and be with him. Ka-chan? She looked back and saw Itachi looking at her with a raised eyebrow. Why did you stop walking? Mikoto smiled fondly to her child before kneeling down in front of him and smiling. Itachi, she whispered to her son who nodded his head. When you one day meet a lovely girl, and have children of your own, you'll understand. She leaned in close and kissed his forehead. You wow! Shursei shouted in fake disgust, causing the group to all laugh and smile for the first time that day. Danzo's rude office. Danzo was sitting at his desk, doing paperwork, when he felt a presence approaching him. He looked up from his desk and saw his Kage walking towards him. He could see the web of wrinkles on his old graying face from where he sat. It's been a while since we've had one of these meetings, Horizon. The shinobi no Yami spoke with a slight smile on his face. I should have prepared some tea and biscuits had I known you were coming. Danzo, the elder Sarutobi, stared emotionlessly into his old teammate's eyes as he approached him. I see you're still operating in the shadows? Please, he scoffed at his old friend with a smirk on his face. Like you have known the entire time. You'd be suspired at how much I know these days. He walked up to the chair that was in front of his desk and sat down. What did you find out? About what? Sarutobi slammed his hands down into the desk in front of him. He looked up at the man in front of him with the meanest glare he could muster. Don't play games with me, Danzo. The only game I'm playing is when you were too weak to finish all those years ago. The rude commander sneered. Remember, I'm the one who has the guts to make these moves. Or did that slip your mind when you went to pity those fools? And I want you to remember that it's not you they'll blame but me when they find all of this out. The elder Kage yelled into the empty cave where they sat. When who figures it out? Danzo asked with a raised eyebrow. The last ones who came close to figuring out are now dead. The only one who has a chance of figuring all of this out is busy dealing with 3 brats, 2 of which aren't even hers. And a loveless marriage that. I'd be careful about what you say about those 2 children, Danzo. Hiruzen interrupted before continuing. All 3 of them have been commissioned for the ANBU Black Ops, Hiruzen warned as he eyed his old teammate. Ah yes. Danzo stood up and walked up to the glass window that was behind his desk. Itachi Uchiha, Shursui Uchiha, and Naruto Uzumaki. Or should I call him Namikaze now that he's in Chunin? How did you find out about that? Hiruzen growled angrily through gritted teeth. Oh please, Danzo waved off the man with a small chuckle. I can see your political moves from a mile away. It was obvious that you wanted them to be NBU. I'm shocked Hitaki hasn't figured it out yet. Actually he has. And how did you even know about that? All nominations and applications are rank secrets? Are you really suggesting that there's information in this village that I don't know about? Danzo chuckled to himself quietly, which made the elderly Kage even more frustrated. But to answer your question, you have quite a few leaks in your administration. And where are they? Suddenly the cavern was filled with a boisterous laughter. Hiruzen looked at Danzo, who was still looking at the window, but now was holding his stomach due to his laughter. I didn't realize that I had become a walking comedian. Hiruzen narrowed his eyes, and glared daggers into his friend's back. Oh Hiruzen, Danzo said while wiping a tear from the corner of eye. You think I'm just gonna tell you where the leaks are? He turns back around and smirked at the man. That's not how this game works and you know it. I'm very well aware of how this game we play works. Hiruzen grumbled with eyes full of hate. If you're so well aware, then why are you asking me such stupid questions? Danzo chucked as he walked back to his desk. Honestly, I'm starting to see why you were replaced all those years ago. The desk that was in front of them was no more as soon as those words left Danzo's mouth. Splinters of wood rained down from the sky like little wooden raindrops. Danzo smirked at the amount of chakra that was wafting off the elderly Kage like rays of sunlight. Did I strike a nerve? Danzo asked with mock concern in his voice. He grinned at the old man in front of him who was still seething with rage. Don't mention that. Sarutobi bellowed into the cavern, caused him to leak out more chakra. Danzo waved him off and started pick up papers that were now on the stone-cold floor. So what was it you wanted anyway? What you found out when you sent 4 of your route after Naruto? Hiruzen yelled at the man who raised an eyebrow in response. I never sent anyone after Naruto, and that Hyuga. You're not the only one who can get information in this village, Danzo. I want what you know and I want it now. Well, that's too bad because he killed them all. Silence for a long time after that was said. Sarutobi knew that Naruto was strong. He knew that Naruto was strong. He knew that Naruto could take care of himself, but to beat 4 of Danzo's men, that was something that he was not expecting. How strong were the ones you sent this time? He asked after a few beats of silence. Mid to high Chunin. I told you to send strong opponents if you were going to go down this path. Hiruzen cried in frustration. You told me to send opponents that wouldn't kill him. Hiruzen facepalmed and started rubbing the bridge of his nose. So you've got nothing on his abilities? Nope, although I'm sure you haven't just asked him about it. You think it's that easy? Hiruzen asked the man with a raised eyebrow and a chuckle. Maybe I'm not the only one who's losing their edge. That's right, he's under the protection of one Mikoto Uchiha. Danzo growled to himself, which made Sarutobi chuckle. What's wrong? Sarutobi chided with a smirk. Something not to your liking? I'm shocked you're not worried about her more. She's one of the only people in this whole village who could figure this whole thing out. It's not like she can do anything about it. Fugaku has made her credibility almost zero. Everyone thinks she's just a fangirl of the Yondaime, and everyone's terrified of her, he explained while stacking more papers. Hell, I'm shocked she's not pregnant again so that he can keep a closer eye on her, Danzo commented while organizing the remains of his desk. Sarutobi got up from his chair and turned towards the exit. Yes, because we all know how Fugake loves his women submissive and breedable, he sarcastically commented while walking away. Danzo looked up from the splinters that were his desk and raised an eyebrow at the retreating form of his old friend. Leaving so soon? Yes, Hiruzen answered without turning around to face the man. Unlike you, my work never ends. Danzo chuckled at his old friend's answer as he watched him walk away. Deep down, he always enjoyed these meetings with the Kage. He would never admit it, but having someone to play political games with was pleasing to him. In fact, Sarutobi finally stopped and turned around to give one last parting thought. I have a feeling both of our jobs are about to get very interesting. With that, Sarutobi vanished from the deep dark cave that was the root headquarters. Danzo knew that he was right. He knew that now that Naruto and Hinata were back in the village, things would never be the same. He just didn't know how right he was. Konoha General ICU Ward October 24, 52 AFK. When Hinata opened her eyes, she immediately noticed that she was in a really soft bed. She turned over to her side and saw a beautiful vase of lilies sitting in water. Ever since she was a child, she had loved playing with flowers. She even persuaded her mother to let her have a rose garden where she would be able to plant and breed different flowers. She looked over and saw the reason she was in the hospital in the first place. In a bed adjacent to her was her savior, her friend, her hero, Naruto Uzumaki. While she might have been unconscious during most of the journey back, she knew that she would have died had it not been for him. "Oh Naruto, why is it always you saving me?" She wondered aloud to herself in the hospital room. This wasn't the first time that Naruto had saved her. No, it had happened many times when they were on missions to kill bandits before the exams. She could remember these times as clear as day, but yet she couldn't remember a single time where she had saved him. She couldn't remember a single time where she had stopped a kunai, warned him of danger or anything. The only thing remotely close was telling him about that strange woman she had seen when they were walking to the exams in the first place. Kami, that seems so long ago at this point. She thought to herself as she stared outside of the window. She had been looking out of the window for a while, watching as the wind blew the leaves gently through the sky. She envied the leaves, able to freely go wherever they wanted without a care in the world. It's different now, right? I mean, what was the point of us going to those exams? Was it to die? Surely we weren't meant to pass anything. Was it a setup? She didn't know. Hell, she didn't know if Naruto knew. All she knew was that she had been stuck in the woods of Kirigakure for what felt like an eternity. "Good morning, Hinata." She looked up and was quite shocked to see so many people entering the room. She raised an eyebrow when she realized that she didn't sense them before they entered the room. She saw that her parents were there along with Kakashi, Yugao, Mikoto, and the Hokage. She smiled at her parents, who smiled back at her. "Good morning, Hokage-sama." She replied in a neutral tone which didn't go unnoticed by the other occupants of the room. Her peel-like eyes swept the entire room and took in the multiple people that were in it. "How are you feeling?" her mother asked while walking over to her still bedbound daughter. Hitomi observed her daughter and frowned. "She's on guard," she thought with a frown. "I'm feeling much better, Kaa-chan, thank you for asking," the little girl replied while still keeping an unreadable face. For the people in the room, the little girl in front of them was totally unrecognizable from the little girl that they had known just 90 days prior. "I'm glad you are feeling much better, Hinata. We were quite worried about you and poor Naruto-kun while you were at the exam," Sarutobi said with a kind, grandfatherly smile on his face. Instead of responding, she had chosen to keep silent and nod her head. This didn't cause too much alarm in the room since she had always been a quiet child. However, those who really knew her knew that something was going on. There was a strange silence being kept in the room. The kind of silence that meant an uncomfortable conversation was on the horizon. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. To Hinata, the room felt like it was suffocating due to how much negative energy was in the room. And she wasn't the only one to feel it either. She glanced over at her companion, Naruto, and noticed that his heart rate monitor was showing a slightly higher heart rate than normal. "Something is going on here, and I need to figure out what it is. They are going to cause his blood pressure to change if they aren't careful." "Was there something you needed, Hokage-sama?" she asked the old man, who internally frowned. He had wanted to spend a little more time out of his office, but alas, duty called. Actually, he reached into the pockets of his robes and dug out 2 scrolls. "There are a few things we need to discuss." He walked over and placed the scrolls onto the girl's lap. "I want you to open those 2 scrolls. This conversation can't continue until you do." He smiled and watched as Hinata grabbed the scrolls. She examined them and shrugged her shoulders, figuring that if the Hokage was giving them to her then they must be safe. She weighed the scrolls in her hands, feeling the high-quality materials that they were made out of. She then channeled chakra into them, and watched as they unraveled, revealing a Chunin jacket and a letter addressed to her. She raised an eyebrow and looked back at the man, confusion written all over her face. "Why am I getting promoted?" she asked the man, much to the shock of everyone in the room. "I barely did anything while we were there. Actually, let's get into that." The elderly man crossed his arms and looked at Hinata, authority wafting off of him even before he spoke. "Please tell me what happened during the exams, and please, don't leave anything out." He gave the poor girl a look that dared her to try lying to him. "Wait, wouldn't you want Naruto-kun to also be awake so that he can give his input?" Kakashi asked his boss, who shook his head. "No, Kakashi, that would take too long. The doctor says that he won't be Kankura for another 2 weeks. Hinata is ready and willing to give us answers now, right Hinata?" His eyes lowered down on the little who nodded her head. "Good, now why don't you start when you fought the root agent and didn't ask for backup?" Hinata gulped at the accusation, but stayed strong. After everything she had gone through in the past few months, this was hardly the worst thing to ever happen to her. "Well, sir," Naruto sensed a bad vibe coming from the man who was supposed to be acting as our sensei. "He had me scan his person with my eyes and we discovered a seal at the base of his tongue. That was when Naruto and I engaged him in open combat. He was actually fairly strong, but Naruto didn't want to cause an all-out fight in the middle of the pathway to the village gate, so we decided to let our summons do the bulk of the fighting," she explained to the group, who all nodded their heads, accepting the words that were coming out of her mouth. "Okay, But why didn't you request backup after you found out that there was a possible plot in Kirigakure? Sarutobi inquired while pacing the space just in front of the Hyuga's bed. Well, I tried to get Naruto to agree to send for Ka-chan and Mikoto-sensei, but he said that we could handle it ourselves. She then went on to explain how they came to the agreement to use their summons to relay a message to the Kage that something had happened. You know, what Naruto did was actually pretty smart. Shikako commented after Hinata was finished speaking. He deliberately left out crucial information that Hokage-sama would have used to determine whether or not it was worth the risk of sending out backup. He must have thought that both of them could complete the mission without outside help. Or he was an idiot who was overconfident in his abilities and thought that they didn't need any help. Kakashi added with a frown visible through his mask. I tried to get him to send a message requesting for backup, but he didn't agree. Once he explained his reason, I agreed with him. He explained that the two obvious choices would have been to send Mikoto and Ka-chan. Both of them would have been coddling us the entire time. So, we just decided to ride it out. Hinata explained to the group, who all understood. We wanted to prove ourselves and make a statement that we could do this. While I commend both of you for wanting to prove yourselves, Hiruzen looked up and glared at the girl who, surprisingly, didn't flinch nor waver under his gaze. What both of you did was not only reckless, but it was downright stupid. I mean, going into a foreign country with no information about it along with no backup has bad idea written all over it. I would expect a decision like this to come from someone like Naruto, but you, Hinata? This is unexpected and out of character. I expect that this will not happen again, and that you will inform the administration if you are in legitimate need of backup. Hinata had had enough of hearing what the Hokage had to say. She didn't want to hear that what she and Naruto did was wrong. They didn't have very many options to begin with, and didn't have a lot of time to choose an option. He wasn't there, she angrily thought while gazing at the man in front of her. Eyes narrowed as she channeled her first batches of Ki ever. If it wasn't already clear to everyone in that room, Hinata had changed. She wasn't the same little girl she was when she left the village all those months ago. She had the look of someone who had seen her fair share of things. She wasn't about to sit back and listen to someone talk down to her. Last time I checked, decisions like this fall on the captain of the squad. And when the captain is indisposed, it's a vote among the members of the squad. Hinata fired back at the Hokage, who coiled back in shock. He had expected multiple things, but not a nasty Hinata. That's what we did. We voted and both of us agreed to not tell you about it. I don't appreciate you talking down to me like I don't know the results of that decision. Last time I checked, you're not the one in the hospital bed, I am. And don't talk bad about Naruto-kun when he isn't here to defend himself. She turned away from the man and looked back at the window. She let out a deep breath. She watched as more leaves guided through the wind. This time, two smaller leaves fall away from the much larger group, twisting and turning in the wind as they descended to their final resting place on the ground. Hokage-sama. Shikako looked at the man who turned his head over his shoulder. I think he should talk about what's next for Naruto and Hinata. He knew that they weren't going to get any more information out of Hinata. Something had happened to her, something bad, and they weren't going to find out what it was, and they would just have to live with that. Hiruzen frowned but nodded his head. He wasn't afraid to admit that he wanted to know what truly happened while Naruto and Hinata were away. While he did have alternative methods to get information out of people, he didn't want to do that here. He glanced around at everyone and let out a sigh. Mikoto-chan, would you be so kind as to get Hinata and I some tea? He looked at the Uchiha, who nodded her head and promptly left the room. Thank you. He turned back to face Hinata, who still was refusing to face him. Hinata, I'd like you to open the second scroll. Hinata looked at the second scroll that was sitting on her bedside table with intrigue. It was a deep red and much smaller than the scroll that contained her Chunin jacket. She shrugged her shoulders and unsealed the contents. A piece of paper fell out of the scroll and landed on the sheets. She picked up the paper and quickly scanned it. So he was right, she mumbled to herself quietly. She glanced up at the Hokage and noticed his shocked expression. What? Did you not think Naruto and I wouldn't think about our lives outside after we participated in the exams? She asked the man with a raised eyebrow. When did he figure it out? Sarutobi asked while leaning closer towards his newest mystery. You don't give Naruto-kun enough credit. She smirked at the man and looked over at her still sleeping best friend. He told me that we would be either in the academy or put into the NBU. I see. He looked at Naruto and chuckled. Perhaps I have underestimated him greatly. He thought to himself before returning to look at the child. Well, Naruto-kun was correct. You both have been scouted and recruited by the ANBU commander herself. She was very adamant that both you and Naruto join. Okay, I'll do it. The temperature in the room dropped to an icy level after Hinata's declaration. Yugo and Kakashi were happy about it due to the fact that she was going to be on their squad if she made it through basic. Mikoto, who had just passed out the cups of tea, was also quite pleased with Hinata's dedication. Hitomi was not as happy about Hinata's decision as the others. She had wished to talk to her daughter for a little while before she chose whether or not she was going to condemn a large portion of her childhood to the shadows. She looked at Hinata, who looked at her with the same determination that she herself had when she was trying to get into the ANBU when she was younger. When she looked into her daughter's eyes, she didn't see the same semi-innocent little girl she was when she left in late July. No, she saw the looks of a woman that has seen the hardships of the world they live in. As a mother she was horrified, but as a shinobi she didn't know what to feel. She knew that this was a necessary evil, but part of her wanted to take her place. She wanted to be the one in the trenches, fighting, killing for her village, not her 4-year-old daughter. Well, are you sure? She finally asked her little girl who nodded at her. Yes, Ka-chan, I need to do this, she said desperately. Hiruzen looked at the cup of tea that Mikoto had handed him. He had been Kage for a very long time, but never had he ever thought that he would be interviewing a 4-year-old for his most elite ninjas. He looked up at the young girl who looked at him with a fierce gaze. He sighed and finally took a sip of his tea. Hinata, he shifted his old, tired, eyes over to the window. Why are you doing this? And I want a clear answer. He moved his eyes back to the girl who, by this point, had gone ridged. Deep down you know you weren't built for fighting, Hinata. Sarutobi sipped his tea while keeping eye contact with the child in front of him. Hinata, you are such a kind and gentle soul. Why would you want this life? Why would you want to pursue a life of killing, serving one's village? Why would you subject yourself to this? You can always do this when you were about to say that I could do this when I'm older. Weren't you Hokage-sama? She asked the old man sitting in front of her. He was about to respond but was silenced when Hinata continued to speak. Well, are you going to offer that same option to Naruto? She once again asked the Hokage, who looked away from her in shame. Are you going to give him the option to be a kind and gentle soul, or that he could do all this when he's older? Tell me now, Hokage-sama. She stopped, commanding him to look at her with the authority in her voice. She knew she had her parents', Mikoto's, even Kakashi and Yageo's attention. She knew that right now, she had the world's attention. I know what happened. I know that he lived almost a year in isolation. I know that he's the Jinchuriki. I know that this village is a lion's den. Hell, you know it too. You know, deep down, he can't have a normal childhood. He never has and he never will. You can't give him the option of being a normal child because you know, deep down, he never was nor will be normal. So how dare you offer me something you know you can't give him? Her words reverberated off of the small hospital room walls as they sunk into the skulls of those that heard it. Hayashi and Hitomi looked at each other and nodded their heads. They both knew that there was no dissuading their daughter off of this path. They both looped their arms around each other's waists and listened. They listened to what Hinata had to say, as did everyone else. You want to know the reason I'm going to do this? She asked the old man, and everyone else in the room who nodded his head. She sighed while rubbing her eyes with her hands. I'm doing this so he won't be alone, she finally answered, much to everyone's surprise. I sensed something dark in him. When he looked at me with those Sharingan eyes, they were cold. They were evil. If he has to do this, then I'll do it with him. I'm not doing this for my village. I'm not doing this for the Hyuga name. I'm doing this to keep Naruto from destroying himself. You don't understand what I saw in those eyes of his. It was like they were growing darker and darker. I can't leave him alone to that darkness, not after everything he did to save me. She glanced over at her best friend who was still sleeping peacefully in his bed, blissfully unaware of everything being said in the room. Not after the lives he's ended to save mine, the miles he ran, the sleepless nights he endured. And you want me to continue to be a kind and gentle soul? She spat at the Hokage, who bowed his head in shame. She took a breath and looked out the window, watching as the wind blew the leaves gently through the air, carrying them to their new destination, wherever it may be. She observed how some leaves twisted and turned in the gentle breeze, and smiled softly. I'm going to be there for him, she whispered gently while looking at the poor comatose boy. Tears welling in her eyes as she gripped the white sheets under her. I'm going to be his shield. I'm going to stand by his side. In every fight, in every war, in everything. I will not leave his side, she shouted, determination swelling up in her small chest. Deep down, I know I can't do everything, but I can, and will, attempt to do everything I can to be the support that he needs. The support of a medic, strategist, and as a friend. She moved her hands to wipe the stray tear that was about to fall from her eye. She took a deep breath and looked Sarutobi dead in the eyes, a fire billowing behind her cream-colored pearls. That's why I'm doing this, Hokage-sama. She smiled. He's why I'm going to train. Day and night if I have to. Also I can stand at his side. Now, forever, and always. Konoha General ICU Ward December 24, 52 AF. Naruto didn't remember when he could start to feel other people. It sort of just happened for him. He had just been floating in a dark void, endlessly drifting in nothingness. Slowly but surely he was able to feel and hear. It wasn't a quick process by any means, but what initially were raw noises to him started to become voices. What used to be raw chakra around now could be distinguished between different living things. Now, Naruto was back to what he thought he could function. He could sense people around him. He could pinpoint where all the nurses and doctors were in the hospital. He could feel the swirling of people's chakra as they moved closer to them. He could identify their emotions as they passed his room, and smell what they ate for breakfast that day. This, of course, meant that he could feel when 3 people walked into his room in the dead of night. He kept his eyes closed, but was now wide awake, ready to strike. Is he awake yet? One of them, a man, asked while they moved around the room. I don't think so. Another, this one a woman, said while moving to look at what Naruto thought was probably his chart. Says here that he shouldn't be up and moving till after New Year's. Good, the third and final person said as they walked behind the women. Let's keep it that way. We have orders to do this as quietly as possible. Of course, the woman said while reaching into what Naruto thought was some kind of bag. He could feel her reaching and pulled out a kunai. Well, that's not good, Naruto thought as he moved his arm to stop the woman's arm. He sat up and opened his eyelids to reveal his bright blue slitted eyes. Well, he smirked as he looked at the 3 killers in his room. This is one way to wake up from a coma. He didn't let the ninjas recover from their shock and jumped out of the bed, ripped the 4 out of his arm, and started sprinting out of the room. After him. The boss shouted. Naruto didn't need to look behind him to feel the kunai knives that were flying towards him. He ducked and weaved out of their way as he continued to run down the hallway, hospital gown blowing in the wind he was creating. Shit, he cursed as he turned around to see the 3 ninjas blocking his only exit. You have nowhere to go. Naruto turned to look at his would-be assailants, and took in their appearances. We really need to upgrade this village's security, he thought as he noticed the Kiri headbands the 3 ninjas wore. Why are Kirigakure ninjas after me? He shouted as he tried to get as much information out of them as he could while he thought of a good escape. He didn't want to use any chakra because he didn't know if he could or not. Well, only one way to find out. He thought as started going through potential options to get him out of this situation. That's none of your concern, child, the woman said. She was wearing a black top, skin-tight bottoms, and ninja heels. She had brown eyes and wore her brown hair in a ponytail, and had a deep scar running across her right cheek. Plus it's not like you're going to live much longer anyway, said the man who Naruto recognized as the first person to enter the room. He wore the same all-black outfit, but had a much larger build than the woman's more lithe frame. He had jet black hair which fell about his shoulders, and black eyes. Oh? Naruto asked as he formed the ram hand sign with his left hand. This is going to hurt like hell, he thought before smirking. Who said I was dying? Fire style, fireball jutsu. He turned around and blew a fireball into the wall, causing it to crumble, allowing for the cold Konoha winter air to rush into the hallway. He shivered slightly and jumped out of the hole he created and launched himself as far away as possible. Once he landed on one of the lower roofs of the hospital, he sprinted towards the edge of it and hopped to another roof which was close by. I need to get out of here, he mumbled to himself as he ran from roof to roof. Since Konoha only had one major hospital, which was situated right in downtown Konoha, he had very few options of where he could go. He thought about going to Mikoto in the Uchiha district, but he knew that waking her up along with countless other Uchihas would have been a terrible idea. He then turned towards his second best option, the Hinata. He closed his eyes to try and focus on her general direction, but didn't have much time since he felt something coming toward him. Naruto opened his eyes and saw a wave of water coming towards him and ducked. His eyes narrowed as they tried to track his assailants. Water style, submersion. A large wall of water was moving full steam towards Naruto, who barely has time to put up a rock wall before it collides with him. Definitely slower than I used to be, he thought bitterly. Let's see, Shushin is out because I don't think my body can take it. I guess I just have to get to her the only fashion way. He groaned and sprinted past the wall towards the clan district. Oh no you don't! The woman shouted while quickly going through hand seals. I won't let you escape, Earth style, Earth bullet. Naruto groaned when he saw the large balls of rock hurtling towards him. He looked down at his body and once again found himself groaning. I feel like I'm gonna be doing that a lot more now that I'm awake, he thought while he dodged one of the boulders. Where the hell are the Anbu? He shouted as he continued to run towards Hinata's house. We took care of that little problem already, the large man shouted while chasing the child. Naruto shook his head and continued to hop from rooftop to rooftop as he moved closer and closer towards Hinata and her home. He could feel her chakra signature getting closer and closer. Earth style, mud river. You know, for Kiri ninjas you sure do use a lot of Earth style jutsu, Naruto shouted as he jumped into the air to avoid the mud that was being placed under him. He felt something tugging on his arm and decided to stretch out his arm, allowing for a silver chain to appear and latch onto a nearby building. Well, that's useful. He smirked as he pulled on the chain, propelling him further into the air. Where was this when I was getting back to Konoha? He asked as he flew through the air. It was here he got an idea. He propelled himself into the air, twisted his body so he was facing his assailants, and held up a hand seal. Fire style, fire flame jutsu. While still in the air, Naruto released a large stream of flames towards the ninjas and laughed. He then reached out his arm and shot a chain towards another building and shot back into the direction he wanted to go in. What are those? The woman shouted while dodging the flames. Yeah, that wasn't in the report we got from the boss. The man looked back at the taller mustached ninja who remained quiet. That doesn't matter, Azutaga, the leader said while going through hand seals. I mean, is there a new plan of action? Azutaga asked while he followed his boss. Zonia and I aren't really long-distance fighters. Well then impersonate one, he growled while taking a deep breath. Water style, violent stream. A highly pressurized stream of water launched out of the man's mouth and flew straight towards Naruto's back. The child looked over his shoulder, saw the attack coming for him, and tried to avoid it. He twisted his body in the air, but was still hit in the shoulder. He tried to launch a chain at a building which was close to him, but all it did was cause his already hurt shoulder to pop out of its socket. Agra! Naruto fell out of the sky and landed badly on the dirt road below him. He groaned as he pulled himself up. He looked down at his light blue hospital robe, which was now covered in dirt. Give up! He looked up and saw all three ninjas forming a semicircle around him with kunais drawn. His eyes narrowed with anger as he tried to get into a position where he could defend himself. I'm sorry? Naruto asked while spitting blood out of his mouth. Did you just tell me to give up? He clenched his fists and turned on his Sharingan. The red eyes glowed in the dark of the alley. Fine then, the leader said while walking towards him. Be that way. The man started walking towards Naruto and was about to stab him before he was interrupted by what looked to be an arrow entering his chest. He staggered back as a second and a third arrow entered his head and his lung. What the hell? The other two ninjas asked as they tried to figure out who shot the arrows. Great timing, Hinata-chan. Naruto smirked as he felt movement form a dark corner of the alley. He looked over and saw a small hooded figure walk out with a metal bow in their hand. They then lowered their hood to reveal the face of one Hinata Hyuga who had a small smile. I'm glad you're awake, Naruto-kun, she said softly as she aimed her bow at the female ninja who was still in shock. We should end this so we can get you back to the hospital. Agreed. He held out his non-injured hand for her to hand him a kunai knife. Once he had the weapon, he launched at the older man who had braced himself for the impact. You're 100 years too early to think you can beat me, kid. He yelled as he slashed at Naruto, who dodged his attack easily. Naruto jumped into the air and sent a flying kick into the man's stomach. So, what's the plan, Hinata? Naruto asked as he slashed at the man's throat. It got blocked by a Zudoga who tried to slam his own knife into Naruto's head. Naruto twisted the man's arms and tried to push him away. Why are you asking me, Naruto-kun? Hinata asked as she started going through hand seals. You've always been the one to make the plans on the fly, she said while using her bow as a slashing weapon. You are rescuing me, Nada-chan. He smiled as he dodged a punch to the head. Battle Format 6, she said with a newly found confidence. Naruto nodded his head and performed a backflip over Hinata and started going through one-handed seals. Hey, watch out, they've got some battle strategy thing going on. A Zudoga shouted as he formed up with his only living partner. Ready? Naruto asked as he tried to catch his breath. I should be asking you that, Hinata said while going through one-handed seals. It sounds like you're exhausted. Naruto rolled his eyes and smirked. You try fighting immediately after getting out of a coma. He nodded his head, signaling for both children to take a deep breath. Hidden Miss Jutsu. Both Kiri ninjas had seen the Miss roll enter the alley and laughed. They'll learn to not use our own jutsu against us, Azurich said while starting to go through his own hand seals. Naruto glanced over at Hinata and smirked. The two 5-year-olds were sitting on the roof of a nearby building watching the two ninjas. Ready for the show? He asked while holding up the hand seal for his signature move. She sighed and shook her head, but didn't try to hide the smile on her face. Bring down the thunder. The two ninjas that were in the mist had no clue what was happening when a giant lightning bolt came crashing down. They didn't have any time to react as they were electrocuted and turned to ash. Hinata looked down at the Kiri ninjas and sighed. She knew that they were dead. Oh Kami, Naruto! There were many things that Hitomi Hyuga expected to happen to her. She expected to have her husband's eyes glued on her whenever she walked into a room due to the fact that she had cut him off of any sex for a period of time. She expected to get glares from the elders of the clan due to being opposed to some of their ideas and ideologies. Something, however, that she didn't think would ever happen to her was her daughter waking her up in the middle of the night screaming. She sat up groggily and looked at her with confusion written all over her face. Hinata, she said while looking at the clock in her room. It's 3 a.m., what could possibly be wrong for it to warrant all this shouting? Naruto-kun is unconscious and injured again. Her daughter shouted while throwing her arms in the air widely. Hinata, Naruto has been in a coma for 2 months. She explained to her daughter. He's still at the hospital. No, he's in my room right now, Ka-chan. Hinata yelled as she grabbed her mom's arm and dragged her out of bed towards the door. That got the gears in Hitomi's head to start turning. Why would Naruto be here? She asked herself while she followed her daughter. Then it hit her. Hinata, she asked her daughter quietly and calmly. Why are you awake right now? Hinata looked at the floor with a blank expression on her face. To be honest with herself, Hinata didn't know why she did what she did. One moment she was asleep, then she felt like something bad was going to happen. She didn't know why. She didn't know how she knew, just that something was going to happen. All she knew was that Naruto was in trouble, and that was enough for her. She picked her head up from the floor and looked at her mother dead in the eyes with the most serious expression that she could muster. Because I knew he was in trouble and had to help. That alone would have been enough of an answer. But for Hitomi the thing that got her was the fire that was burning behind her eyes. The last time she had seen Hinata this determined was the day she was in the hospital talking to Hiruzen. Alright, she said while bending to one knee. I believe you. Then let's go. Hinata smiled while walking towards her room. Once she reached it, she slid open the door to reveal a very pale Naruto lying on her bed. Hinata has already reset and healed his dislocated shoulder, and had healed the bruises on his arm and face. He looks to be fine, maybe he was just tired. Hitomi said as she walked over to him and looked at him closer. I'm not totally positive, but I think it's chakra exhaustion, Hinata said quietly while lightly moving her palms over Naruto's chest. She desperately looked at her mother for any kind of help. "Ka-chan, I don't know what to do." She looked down at her hands and balled up her fists. Hitomi looked at her daughter and nearly shed a tear at the look of despair on her face. She had watched Hinata sit by his side in the hospital every day for 3 weeks before she was told that it wasn't good for her mental health. Not that throwing herself into intense physical training was any better. Hitomi walked over to Hinata and got down onto her knees so that she could look her in the eyes. She brushed a bit of her indigo hair out of the young girl's eyes and smiled at her sadly. "Honey," she said quietly while cupping her cheek. "He'll be okay." Hinata looked over at Naruto again and deflated. All the drive and determination gone, only to be replaced by intense sadness. "I miss him," she whispered while letting the tears she had been holding back run down her face. "I missed him so much." "I know, sweetheart." Hinata looked at her best friend and sighed. "I can't keep watching him lay in a hospital bed," she sobbed as she tried to keep her tears hidden from her mother. "It hurts me so much." Hitomi clutched her chest and let out her own sigh as she saw how distraught her daughter was. She had been in a similar situation with Kushina after she had gotten injured in the war. She gently grabbed her daughter and moved in to give her a hug. "Don't worry, darling," she cooed softly as she felt her daughter sob into her. "He's going to get better. He's going to get so much stronger that you won't have to worry about him." "But if I don't worry, then who will?" she asked while looking up at her mother, tears streaming down her face. "Mikoto-san has her own family to worry about. You have to worry about the clan with Tsusan. Kakashi and Yugao have missions to worry about. Who's gonna worry about him if I don't?" Hitomi was stunned by what she just heard. She looked at the fire and desperation in her daughter's eyes and truly felt pain. She knew that ever since Hinata found out the lengths that Naruto had gone through to save her, that she was even more determined to be by his side. She had seen it every day as her daughter mad clone after clone to improve. She felt it when she started noticing how hard Hinata's Juken strikes were getting. She knew that Hinata wanted to get stronger, but to see the length that she would go for this boy, it was inspiring. "I'll worry for him." Both girls looked up to see Hayashi and Hizashi standing in the doorway of Hinata's room. Both men were wearing their battle attire as if they had been preparing for a fight. Hitomi looked at her husband with a confused look on her face as though asking for an explanation. "As you said all those months ago," Hayashi walked further into the room and laid his hand on Hinata's shoulder. "Naruto is one of your babies. We both have seen that boy grow so much over the time he's been with us that I've grown to see him as my own son." Hayashi, Hitomi whispered as she looked at her husband, tears threatening to fall from her own eyes. "You don't mean that, do you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I do." He walked over to the boy's bed and placed his hand on his shoulder. "He's the son of my best friend, and damn it if I'm not going to help him when shit inevitably hits the fan." "I agree with you, brother," Hizashi said from the doorway. "And the Branch family feels the same." Hinata moved her mother so that she could get a better look at her father. "Do you truly mean that?" she asked quietly. "Yes." Hayashi leaned down and looked his daughter squarely in the eyes. He then nodded his head. Every word. Naruto's immediate response to waking up in a different room was to jump out the window and run away. However, as soon as he realized whose room it was, he relaxed. He sensed someone approach the door and immediately smiled when he figured out who it was. "It's good to see you awake, Naruto-kun, Mikoto-ka-chan." He squealed as he tried to get out of bed but couldn't due to how sore he was. Mikoto smiled at the child that was hers in all but name. She had heard from Hitomi that he was caught up in some shenanigans and rushed over to see how he was doing. She walked further into the room, her red and white sundress moving with her as she crossed the distance. She finally knelt down and gently took Naruto's hand in hers and cried. "How are you feeling?" she asked as she gently rubbed circles into the back of the boy's hand. "Sore?" he asked as he scooted over so that he could be closer to her. She laughed quietly while looking at the child's body. Hinata had done a good job getting rid of most of the bruises and scars with healing salves and medical chakra, though there was a bandage around the boy's left shoulder where he dislocated it. "I bet you're feeling sore," she said while still holding his hand. "You were sprinting through the roofs of Konoha being chased by ninjas after being in a coma," she chided while still rubbing his hand. Naruto at least had the decency to blush at how crazy the situation sounded. He didn't even know if he was allowed to be doing half the stuff he did last night. He could definitely feel that his jutsus were taking more chakra than they used to. Now that he thought about it, he definitely didn't feel the aching pain in his joints and leg muscles when he was running yesterday. Yeah, he smiled slightly while rubbing his head with his right hand. "It was a crazy night last night." Mikoto agreed while letting go of his hand and walking over to him. "We need to get you back to the hospital so that they can check you over now that you're awake." "Why would I do that?" Naruto asked as he swung his legs over the bed. He could feel his body protest as he stood up and walked to the door. "Why would I do that when I can train?" Naruto walked down the stairs and into the kitchen where he saw Hinata eating while reading what looked to be a medical textbook. He saw her look up and her eyes widened when she saw him. "Naruto!" she shouted as she jumped from her chain and ran to give him a tight hug. "You're awake!" she said into his chest as she cried softly. Naruto grunted when he felt the weight of his friend come crashing into him. He had to take a step back in order to avoid falling. He wrapped his arms around her and hugged her tightly. The last time had seen her before last night was in his arms as he crossed into the village. Now, she was okay. She had made it. It's good to see you, Hinata-chan, he whispered as he breathed in the scent of her shampoo. He buried his head into her long magenta hair and let a few tears fall. It's good to see you too, Naruto-kun, she replied while burying her face deeper into his chest. The duo stood there in the middle of the kitchen for what felt like hours. Neither wanted to move lest the other suddenly disappear. They both had longed for this moment for so long, that it felt surreal that it was finally happening. However, the moment couldn't last, and both children were brought out of their hug by their respective parental figures. It's good to see that both of you have finally reunited, Hitomi said while holding a mug of coffee in her hands. However, I think Naruto would benefit from a good meal and a trip to the hospital to make sure that he is 100% okay. Both children nodded their heads and let go of the other. Hinata moved back to her seat at the table and sighed. Now that you're awake, you're going to have to see the Hokage, she said while taking a bite of her toast. I figured he would want to know what happened while we were out there, Naruto replied while making his way to sit next to his best friend. Actually, he paused as he looked out the window. What day is it? It's December 25th, sweetheart, Mikoto answered while handing Naruto a plate of breakfast. You were out for exactly 2 months. 2 months? Naruto shouted while flinging his arms into the air. Yes, Naruto-kun, Hinata said quietly while trying not to let her anxiety show. You were unconscious for 2 months. Geez, did we even pass the exams? He asked while taking a bite of his eggs. Funny you should ask. Mikoto walked over to her purse and pulled out the same 2 scrolls that had been given to Hinata. These are for you. I'm sure Hiruzen would have wanted to talk to you about it, but he's not here right now. What are they? He asked while Mikoto handed him the scrolls. Once he had them in his hands, he tossed them up and down, and examined them extremely closely. Just open them, silly, Hitomi giggled while sitting down in front of Hinata. Naruto shrugged his shoulders and channeled a bit of chakra through the scrolls and caused it to explode in a small cloud of smoke. He waved his hand in the air to clear the smoke from his face and immediately stopped moving when he saw the green jacket and a piece of paper. I passed? He shouted as he looked at the Chunin jacket that was now in his possession. How the fuck did I pass? He then looked at Hinata, who was smirking at him. Did you pass too? Oh, just wait till you see the second scroll, she said while turning her full attention to Naruto. He raised his eyebrows and opened the second scroll. He mumbled quietly as he read the piece of paper, his eyes growing wider and wider as he continued reading. I knew it! He shouted while fist bumping the air. I knew he was going to put us into the NBU. He turned to face his friend who was smiling at him. I'm guessing you're accepting? Of course I am, she answered while sliding over her application. The paperwork is due January 4th, so you need to get it signed. Oh, you won't need to worry about that. Mikoto reached into her bag and pulled out a scroll with the Hokage seal on it. Kakashi and Yugao already took care of it. She tossed the scroll to Naruto, who caught it. All it needs is your signature, and then you can take it to the Hokage. Naruto nodded his head and grabbed a pen from one of the many that Hinata had when she was studying and signed the document with his name. He showed it to Mikoto, who nodded her head and smiled. When will we officially get promoted? Hinata asked while Naruto tried to put on the jacket. When I talked to Hiruzen, he said we could have a small ceremony with a few of the other clans that knew that you both were in the exams. Hitomi explained while she collected the clean dishes. So who all knew we were going to Kiri? Naruto asked while drinking a glass of milk. The Yamanaka, Nara, and Abirambi, Mikoto answered. Don't forget Danzo, Naruto added while clenching his fist. The little shit tried to kill us before we even left the village. Mikoto and Hitomi looked at each other and sighed. They both knew that they would have to know the full story of what happened to Naruto and Hinata when they left. However, they also knew that it could wait. They had seen how happy the 2 children were to see each other. Should we push for details? Hitomi mumbled to her friend as they watched the children talk about the training they were going to do to prepare for the NBU. Mikoto shook her head and smiled gently. When she looked at Naruto and Hinata, she could only see herself and Minato, 2 lifelong friends whose lives were thrown into chaos because of the actions and decisions of others. She looked at the children and softly smiled. No, she said while wiping a tear that was starting to fall down her face. He's only just gotten back. Let's let them enjoy this little bit of peace they get before they start training for the next life-altering disaster Sarutobi is going to throw them into next. Hitomi nodded her head and continued to sip her cup of coffee as she watched the children talk. Yeah, she said quietly. You're right. What if Uzumaki clan finds Naruto Council bashing harem part 4? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoyed this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel, and leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down and thanks for watching the video, and see you guys in the next video.